Hello, this is Sean Dixon, and I'm here with Brian Patterson and John Gonzalez. We are each returned mission presidents for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and this is the Preach My Gospel Mission Prep Podcast. We are here to help prepare you to become successful Preach My Gospel missionaries and lifelong disciples of Jesus Christ. In each episode, we explore powerful concepts from every chapter in Preach My Gospel. We will talk to returned missionaries and others about their experiences and insights. You can even use this podcast to get Institute credit. Let's get started. Bienvenidos, hermanos y hermanas. We are excited to welcome you back to our podcast. Today, we are going to be actually talking about Preach My Gospel, Chapter 7. How can I better learn my mission language? And it's a great day to be doing this. How are you both doing, John and Brian?
Doing just fine.
Are you in a good mood, John? Did you wake up on the right side of the bed today?
I did.
Okay.
I did.
That's good.
And I followed the law driving down here
That's
today.
awesome. Good to hear. How about you, Brian?
Oh, it's just great to be with this group. I love it.
Yeah, we're especially excited to welcome our good friend, Brother Garrett Beeston, with us today. I got to know Garrett as a mission president when he came down as a representative of the missionary department to observe our missionaries and help provide some training and feedback in some of our training meetings, and just became a great friend with Garrett, and just cannot recommend someone more highly than I would Garrett as far as when it comes to missionary work. And John, I know you and Garrett have a long history together.
I love Garrett. We got to know each other on multiple trips to missions, and then President, after we would visit you, we'd go back to the hotel and say, "Can you believe?"
Tell stories about what you just saw, right?
No, but it was just a wonderful opportunity to be with Garrett. He's a good friend, and I learned a lot from him as I went on trips and observed him engage with missionaries. And
yeah. He's a lot of fun, but one thing I think coming off the last few episodes that we've done on Christ-like attributes is that one thing I can say about Garrett is that he exemplifies so many Christ-like attributes in the way that he goes about the work.
Garrett, can you share a little bit about yourself, your personal life, where you're from, the mission you served, and your family?
Certainly. So the very best part about me is I have an incredible wife, Kelsey. We have 4 amazing kids. They are so inspiring to me and teach me every day about what it means to be a disciple, and I want to be better because I have such an amazing family.
What are their ages?
So my oldest son is 12, then we have an 8-year-old son, and then a 4-year-old girl and a 2-year-old girl. So we're in a really fun stage right now of almost out of diapers, got a young man, that is doing a lot of those neat things at that stage, and then baptism that we had last year. It's a really sweet season.
And you served your mission?
I served my mission in New Jersey, Cherry Hill.
So Garrett, can you tell us what your current role with the missionary department is?
Yeah, sure, President Dixon. I work as a manager of training and operations with the International MTCs.
Okay.
So there's 8 of them outside of Provo, and I help provide support and direction to those 8 international MTCs.
Okay. What other types of roles have you had with the missionary department as you've kind of worked into that assignment?
I've been in this assignment for 3 years. But before that, I was a training manager in the Provo MTC for 6 years total, supervising the Romance languages.
So when we say Romance languages, I think a teenager might not quite understand that one. So what would that be exactly?
Yeah, so Spanish, of course, was our biggest language, but we had French, Italian, Portuguese, and then Romanian.
Okay.
So those kinds of languages related to Latin-based languages.
So you oversaw a lot of the training that they would receive in learning a language. That's one of the reasons why we felt you would be perfect for this particular chapter.
So in your role, you were able to really see what works with missionaries to learn a language, maintain it, and then grow that.
Absolutely.
Language.
And what's interesting is we saw a couple different curriculums. I mean, I've been in the MTC now for 15 years, so there's been adjustments, a little bit to approach or to curriculum, but something that has always been kind of the foundational part of learning a language as a missionary is that it's a spiritual endeavor. It's much more that than an academic thing. And even the natural ability of the missionaries, of course, some missionaries, might have a little bit more of a gift or a natural endowment for learning a language, but for missionaries really to be most successful learning a language, it has to be a spiritual endeavor, and it has to include divine help. And I've seen that thousands of times, literally, of missionaries where maybe you thought, wow, I don't know how they're going to do, but when they engage with the Spirit, when they really put in the work and faith necessary to obtain the gift of tongues and interpretation of tongues, they became incredible, inspiring speakers of the language where they were able to fulfill the missionary purpose in a new language. It's miraculous how it works.
One of the things as a stake president, when I set apart missionaries, one of the things that I have always felt impressed to do, especially if they're learning a language, is to give them the gift of tongues. How do you see that doctrine of the gift of tongues coming into play with missionaries?
It's huge, President Dixon. I mean, there's just no way around learning a language that quickly and how deeply you have to learn it in order to connect with people and help them through, various challenges and needs and teach the doctrine powerfully. You have to really jumpstart that with divine help. And I love what Preach My Gospel talks about with regard to the gift of tongues. I think it's probably mentioned 15 times in chapter 7. But for example, on page 134, under the section, Be Dedicated and Diligent, it says, learning to teach effectively in your mission language requires diligent effort and the gifts of the Spirit. Or you turn to the end, there's a whole section just on the gift of tongues. And in that first paragraph there on page 139, it says, the gift of tongues and the gift of the interpretation of tongues can help you as much or more than any other single thing to speak and understand the language of the people in your mission. And I believe that. And we'll continue, to kind of adjust and find the most effective and efficient ways to learn a language and keep growing in the MTC experience. But the foundational piece will always be that a missionary has to go to heaven. They have to exercise faith and then work diligently, showing that faith in the way that they work. There's a great phrase here that for the most part, you won't be able to obtain these gifts without effort. You need to actively seek them. Part of seeking the gift of tongues is to labor and struggle and do all you can to learn the language. We often don't love those words, like, what, we have to labor and struggle? I just thought it was going to be like, magic, poof, and I've got the gift of tongues. But really what it does, and it explains it here, that it enhances our ability. It accelerates our ability and then deepens our ability to learn the language so completely, so comprehensively, that we're able to connect in this really spiritual, deep way, where the language is a part of that, but it's just not a distraction from spirit to spirit connecting, and the Spirit really being the teacher who helps change hearts and bring people closer to the Savior.
So just because the stake president gives you the gift of tongues doesn't mean automatically you should expect to start speaking Spanish, right? That's something that you grow into, and all of these things that you've mentioned and are mentioned in Preach My Gospel almost activate that gift within you. And of course, having the Spirit is the key to that.
I love that, President Dixon. The blessing by an amazing stake president makes that gift obtainable. But the missionary, has to exercise faith. And of course, there are exceptions where there are, kind of for a specific need where the Lord gives a tremendous amount really quickly. But I've found that in the majority of cases, it is that the gift of tongues is activated as we seek for it, as we exercise faith and then work. Then it's incredible how much faster we're able to learn it, how much deeper, and what it does to enhance, maybe what was our own natural ability, or for me at least, lack thereof.
Just the mere fact of being humble to recognize that I cannot do this without the help of heaven. And this applies to anything in missionary work. All of this is done with the assistance of heaven.
As you think about the gift of tongues and through your experiences, when have you seen maybe an example of a missionary who's really applied these principles and received this gift?
I think of a missionary that I got to meet last year, President Patterson, in the Peru MTC. This missionary was doing a Spanish 3 language program, but she actually knew very little Spanish. Her native language was Quechua. This missionary was from Guatemala and had very limited Spanish, but we don't have, a native Quechua program, and so that was the best we could do, was this Spanish 3 program. And the missionary was going to be serving in Peru, where they would need to use Spanish. And I watched this missionary recognize what John said of, I feel so overwhelmed, I feel so inadequate, I'm not understanding a lot of what's happening in the classroom. And this missionary exercised incredible faith. Along with her companion, they prayed and fasted, and they got busy. They made a plan of, all right, this is what it's going to take, and we're going to use every minute that we have, not only during our language study, but other moments, as we're walking to the cafeteria, as, we're in gym time together, exercise time, we're going to be using the language. And to watch what happened over the course of 2 weeks, where this missionary was, using only very, very simple Spanish, a novice speaker certainly, to become a really strong Spanish speaker in the course of 2 weeks. It was amazing to me. And it was just another example, again, of hundreds, President Patterson, that we see in the MTC all the time of, if we'll exercise faith and then we'll work diligently seeking for that gift, that it comes.
You mentioned having a study plan, a language study plan. What would be a few things you'd want our listeners to understand about how to develop a study plan, or how to approach their language learning as they seek the gift of tongues, and then, as you said, put in the effort?
I think, President Patterson, it starts again with making it a spiritual endeavor. And we really want to make our study meaningful. That's not just, I'm learning this, because I'm going to have to take this test, or even things like, I don't want to look silly, but that really it's motivated by, I understand that this is an act of faith, and also that it's motivated by a love for the people. I'm working with Jorge. I'm working with Marlon. I want to be able to express to them the joy that I feel through the gospel, and I don't want my language to be a distraction from that. And so making it meaningful that way, that it's focused on specific people, on specific language activities that you have that day or that week. And then after that you can do the particulars of, okay, if I'm going to help this person, I'm going to teach this principle, what are the specific new vocabulary that I need to learn, and making a list of those things. What's the grammar that's going to help me to be able to communicate better, and kind of saying, all right, these are the couple of grammar principles that I need to work on. And then working through, as Preach My Gospel directs, you've got all these tools to choose from. Which ones will help you to learn those words, or to better, be able to use that grammar principle? And so having kind of those clear elements, but all connecting back to our purpose, that this is a spiritual endeavor, I need divine help, and that it's motivated because I love these people, and I want them to be able to receive the blessings of the restored gospel. And I guess the last thing, if I could add it, President Patterson, is that you get help. You've got a companion to help you. We don't take advantage enough of the members to say, I'm still learning, I need your help. And that's a great way to endear you to the members, and they feel so happy to be able to help you. They love that you're working so hard to want to learn their language, and so using them as a resource as well, in addition to non-members, people that you're working with, of, I want to better speak this language. I want to learn more about your culture and who you are, and help me and work with me, and using them as well as resources as part of your plan that you develop.
And I believe no matter where you serve, no matter what language you're learning, the people there are honored that you would put that effort in to learning their language. Whether you're in the Orient, they just are amazed that you could speak their language. Whether you're in Russia, no matter where you are, it's endearing to them.
Yeah, down in California, so many of the Hispanics that were there were having to bend over backwards to learn English. And when they saw our missionaries doing that for them, bending over backwards and making all this effort to learn Spanish, it was something, like you said, John, that really endeared them to them.
Starting with page 135, create a language study plan. It outlines perfectly what a missionary can do to follow. And if they would just do that, it makes all the difference.
I could not agree more, brethren. I feel like this is like the sealed portion of the plates, this section of chapter 7, where a missionary will feel overwhelmed or discouraged. Oh, I'm not learning it as fast as I want to, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to do this. And you start to ask them a few questions like, how's your language study plan? My what? How are you using your language study every day? Are we supposed to do that every day? So to really go to this section and see, you don't need to overcomplicate it. But if you have a plan, if you have a couple of clear goals, and then you just outline, how am I going to do that? And then just take the time to be diligent every day, to do your language study, to take every opportunity to speak the language, to use it. And I love in the next page here, bullet point 8, where it discusses evaluating our study plan. There is this key to not be afraid of making mistakes. Everyone who learns a new language makes mistakes. There is no way around that. And so taking advantage of our study, and then at every opportunity to use the language and to solicit and welcome feedback, not to get offended or your feelings hurt, but know that I'm learning a new language and you're going to make thousands of mistakes. And that's okay. Start earlier so you can get those mistakes out of the way and not be worried or afraid if you're not perfect right away, because none of us are.
I think I watched a video once that does it like 30,000. It takes 30,000 mistakes to learn a language.
Yeah.
So I always told my missionaries, you can take a year to make those 30,000 mistakes, or you can make them all in a couple months, because mistakes are how we learn. Like, as we make a mistake and we say it wrong, then we can make note of that and we can improve. But if we have to wait until we can give a perfectly worded sentence, we'll be waiting a long time, right? So just go in. I mean, sometimes if you just get the verb out there, even if it's not conjugated right, they understand what you're saying and can help you along, right?
And my wife always jokes with me saying, John, you're not afraid. You butcher the language all the time, and you're not afraid to speak. And I have to admit that I love speaking Spanish, and I recognize that I don't know it perfectly. And so I'll just start speaking.
Yeah, that's why you've learned it so well. Right?
And a missionary can learn to laugh at themselves and
Yes.
laugh with their companion, right, as they make these mistakes. But they shouldn't be afraid to make those mistakes.
It's endearing.
As I listen to a foreigner speak English, I love it. I love hearing their accent. I love hearing how they put words together. And we want our missionaries to learn how to stretch and really master this language to some degree, but also appreciate it. I love hearing non-English speakers speak English, right?
That's terrific, President Patterson.
What if I'm a missionary who receives a call in my native tongue? I'm going to Oklahoma, and I don't need to learn a language. Do I just skip over chapter 7?
I think there's still things in here that are important, and it could happen in a variety of different ways. I mean, you three are all return mission presidents. I imagine there may have been an occasion where you had a language need and you had to assign a missionary, out of the blue to do that. So that's a possibility. Back to President Patterson's point, you're going to meet a lot of people wherever you serve in the United States or other countries around the world who are immigrants to that country and are learning English. And so an ability to empathize with them, to understand, to appreciate, the additional richness that comes out and as they're learning, and to help them through that. You may teach English classes. The principles in chapter 7 will be very helpful for you as you're helping, members or people that you're working with who are still learning your native language.
You may have a companion that is from a foreign country that you're assigned to help them learn English.
Absolutely. It's very likely. And there's a whole section in chapter 7 talking about the importance of learning English if that's not your native language. And it relies on their native companion to be a huge support to them, practicing and encouraging and correcting and studying together. It's another great example. And you don't want to miss, there's this great quote from President Monson in chapter 7 where he says, there is one language that is common to each missionary, the language of the Spirit. It's not learned from textbooks written by men of letters, nor is it acquired through reading and memorization. The language of the Spirit comes to him who seeks with all his heart to know God and keep his divine commandments. Proficiency in this language permits one to breach barriers, overcome obstacles, and touch the human heart. So even though this is not, another language of the world, missionaries and all of us, we're trying to better learn the language of the Spirit. As a lot of our leaders, prophets, and apostles have talked about, learning how to better hear Him, hear the voice of the Spirit, and know how the Lord speaks to us, and And likewise, teaching and helping others in their important need to learn this new language of the Spirit in their experiences with prayer, with studying in the Book of Mormon, of growing their own faith. And so I think a recognition of there's this process and that there is this language of the Spirit that we all need to enhance our ability to communicate with and understand.
So Garrett, walk us into the MTC. I'm a new missionary, and I've been called to learn a foreign language, a second language, and what can I expect? What does that look like? What does that feel like? What tools will I have to help me in developing this language?
I mean, first of all, just know that you're going to the best place on earth. There's a crazy rumor out there, President Patterson, that the happiest place on earth is Disneyland. Those people obviously have not been to the Missionary Training Center and to one of these language classrooms. It is an amazing place. You see miracles happen there, President Patterson, and the truth is, it's going to be in the language. 90% of the time, you're going to be in the new language. And initially, it might feel a little overwhelming, and missionaries might feel, can I really do this? Or can you just switch me, to my native language? So the reality is you're going to be in the language a lot. But as President Dixon said earlier, it should be fun. Learning a new language and having that experience and learning about those people and the culture, it should be exciting and it should feel fun. And so the teachers at the MTC will really try and make it engaging and exciting and not a dull or kind of a drudgery thing like perhaps some of them experienced if they took a language class, in high school or junior high, that it should feel a lot more engaging and a lot more purposeful. That now it's not just for an academic reason of I have to take a test or I got to get this credit, but no, it's because you get to invite and help people come to Christ. And you're fulfilling prophecy, you're fulfilling Doctrine and Covenants, section 90, verse 11, where the Lord promised that everybody would get to hear the gospel in their own tongue, in their own language. They would get to hear it from ordained servants, not some old washed-up wannabe missionary like me, but the real deal who have been set apart by priesthood keys and ordained to be missionaries, ministers, and that it would happen through the Spirit. So you're part of prophecy, and so I think that is a really exciting, compelling thing that missionaries feel about in the way they learn language in the MTC. To what John mentioned earlier, it's an easy way to draw out humility. I think in some ways language missionaries have that benefit early on where they have to go to heaven. They have to drop to their knees. They recognize that as articulate as I thought I was before, as well as I thought the gospel before, I'm basically starting all over. And it's a gift, I think, that language missionaries get early on where they have to go heavenward and they recognize that I cannot do this with my own ability of my own merit. I need God's help. And so you'll see that. And these teachers that you have, they are going to be so loving. They're going to be so patient and encouraging. And they're going to know intimately what you're going through because just a few years before, they were doing that same thing. And so they'll have great ideas and a lot of compassion for what you're going through as a missionary. I've been too long-winded, but maybe just one more thing, President Patterson, to a great question. I just think for me, it's one of the miracles of the MTC and really of missionary work that our teachers, they are not experts. They are not trained linguists. They are not professors from BYU. They are just, recently returned missionaries who maybe a few are studying the language, but most of them, they're studying engineering or nursing or elementary education. And somehow God uses them. It's another manifestation to me of what God promised in Doctrine and Covenants, section 35, where he says in verse 13, "Wherefore I call upon the weak things of the world, those who are unlearned and despised, to thresh the nations by the power of my Spirit. And their arm shall be my arm. I will be their shield and their buckler. I'll gird up their loins. They shall fight manfully for me." It is, in my mind, the secret sauce to the MTC, that these are untrained, imperfect language teachers, but they've got it deep in them of loving the people, of loving the language, of knowing what they went through. And the miracle is it works. A few years ago, I had a dignitary from another country come, and I got to give them a tour. and we visited a language classroom. And he said, "Oh yeah, this is really great, but where are your language experts? Because I hear you have really great language results here." And I said, "Oh no, do you see this young, 20-year-old kid? That's our language teacher." Haha, that's funny, but no, we're seriously, where are the professors? Where are, the world-renowned language experts? And I mean, they were just blown away. They were astonished that it was some, young kid who is our teachers. And we do that with 60 different languages in the Provo MTC, with several of those languages and 4 additional ones in the International MTCs. And in every single case, they are an untrained, unspecialized teacher who just is helping and encouraging these missionaries know how to connect to heaven, receive the gift of tongues, and putting them with resources to do it.
They're following a curriculum that they use that has been proven and tested.
Absolutely.
And things like that.
Yep, that's been proven. That's a great point, President Dixon. It's been proven and developed by language experts. It's gone before, prophets and apostles, and so it's a good program. But there's nothing magic about it. To learn a language, you have to have a lot of input. You got to get a lot of vocabulary and learn some grammar to put that vocabulary together. And then you got to practice it a ton. And so that's, at the heart of it, of how we teach language. Or
I heard someone say once, the only 2 people that learn Finnish are babies and missionaries, right? Like that's the only way to be able to get some of these languages is the Spirit of the Lord to help you.
Garrett, you were assigned to learn Spanish in New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
Sean, you were assigned to learn Spanish in Toronto, where everyone's speaking English. What did you do to learn the language when everything around you was telling you, don't learn it?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that idea freaked me out when I got my mission call and I saw it was New Jersey but Spanish speaking, because I knew I was not going to be immersed. I was not going to see the street signs in it. I wasn't going to go to the grocery store and see Spanish everywhere. I was really worried about that. And even though I'd taken 2 years of Spanish, my Spanish was very limited. I think I knew 5 words, taco, burrito, quesadilla, enchilada. I mean, it was rough. And so that idea freaked me out of, how am I going to be able to learn the language? And I know that I got God's help. It would be really ungrateful of me to say, like, oh, it's because I was so smart or so talented. Of course, I had to work hard. I won't lie to you that I studied like crazy, and I learned that I'm going to mess up and people are going to laugh at me, and I'm going to feel like, oh, I am so lame. But I think pushed me more than anything was when you're just around these people. And I'm sure you saw this, President Dixon, in Toronto, but when you're with Jose Lopez, or when you're with Guadalupe de la Cruz, you just love these people, and you want to be able to express to them what you feel, and it pushes you to study and work at it and not give up, when it doesn't come perfectly or immediately.
You have to be intentional when you're in that kind of a setting with your companion, that we're like, hey, we're going to speak this language to each other. Even though we both speak English and everyone around us speaks English, we have to kind of make that determination that we're gonna be disciplined to speak as often as we can.
And Garrett, I have to say, you're an example of someone that can go to a mission like New Jersey and come out speaking Spanish as if you were in Mexico or Argentina.
I watched a number of our missionaries serving in California learn a second language that would do what they called English fasts, where they would force themselves, this week we are not going to speak any English. And these would be 2 American companions together. And I love that exercise of faith, of committing to these principles in chapter 7 to speak your language as much as you can.
What can a missionary do before he enters the MTC to prepare himself or make himself, hit the ground running once he or she gets to the MTC?
And maybe a second question to that, and I'll let you share, but how much energy and time should a pre-MTC missionary devote to that language effort?
This is a recent development, maybe just the last 5 or 7 years, where pre-mission, once you've gotten your call, for those weeks in between, from your call until you start the MTC, you can get personalized language tutoring and access to all of the MTC language resources. And we probably only have about 50% of the missionaries who take advantage of that. But I can tell you, every missionary who spends maybe an hour or two a week, President Patterson, doesn't need to be a huge commitment, but can learn to introduce themselves, say a simple prayer, share a testimony in the language before they come. They just bring this confidence and this faith that I can do this, and I'm not just so going in so blind that I feel overwhelmed. Now, if that doesn't work for a missionary's situation, no pressure. We're going to have the support, the resources, additional tutors on site to help you. But it is well worth your investment if you'll spend an hour or two meeting with a personalized tutor from the MTC, getting maybe 15 or 20 minutes a day on the Embark Missionary Learning app or other ones that are available. That will just help take off a little bit of the edge, help just release a little bit of that stress of, okay, I can say a few words, and I could say a prayer, I could say a couple lines of my testimony. I think it's well worth it, and there'll be information in the missionaries call packet and on their missionary portal of how they can sign up, and there'll be a lot of available times that can meet their schedule, even if they're still in school or working. There's a huge variety in times to make it fit for the missionary's schedule.
So the Embark app is like Duolingo, but with gospel language.
Yep, exactly.
So the language that they'll be using in the lessons, they can start learning those terminologies, which you wouldn't get in Duolingo.
That is the treasure of Embark, is you get all of that content that's unique to what we're trying to do with missionaries and the kind of the gospel sense. I would just mention Embark it's available to everyone. So, anyone can go on just using their church username and password and get the full access, and it has all, 64 languages that we teach.
You just do that through the App Store?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So for Google or Android, or Apple, it's available on both there. And I think it's a really neat thing, even though if you don't have your call yet, if you're interested in a language, maybe that's your intellectual goal, that you set for the children and youth program, to go on there and use all of those resources, because it's a really, really great tool.
So once you arrive to the mission, how do you not become stagnant and complacent?
This is an excellent point, John. I'm glad that you all are bringing this up, because we'll see this somewhat frequently, actually, where a missionary becomes, confident in the language and is conversational and functional. They can get around and not have any challenges, but that they'll stop studying. They'll stop pushing, of how could I find a new way to say that, or how could I really pay attention to how a native, might express that. There's a really beautiful quote from Elder Holland on page 134 of Preach My Gospel under the section, Be Dedicated and Diligent. It's in the second paragraph, it says exactly what John said of, do not stop improving your language skills once people begin to understand you. Don't be content, right, with just enough there. And then in the next paragraph is the Elder Holland quote. We would hope that every missionary learning a new language would master it in every way possible. As you do so, your teaching and testifying skills will improve. You'll be better received by and more spiritually impressive to the people you teach. Don't be satisfied with what we call a missionary vocabulary only. Stretch yourself in the language, and you'll gain greater access to the hearts of the people. And to your question, John, of how can we be motivated to that, I think really that's the driver back there of you recognize that your ability to connect with the people, to have access to their hearts, that there is a tie to how much, we're able to use the language and really help them feel comfortable with their feeling that we're understanding them and that they can express, these deep things. And so I think, again, love for the people and wanting to really have a deeper connection and have that greater access to their hearts, that will motivate a missionary to keep at it and not stop with just kind of a functional missionary language ability.
Garrett, we can't thank you enough for what you've shared with us and our listeners. I know there's so much to process what you've talked about. As we conclude this episode, is there anything else that you'd like to end with by way of testimony or final insights?
I would just want to thank you again. This has been a really unique and special privilege for me, and with three men that I really admire. I've heard President Patterson's name, probably 1,000 times, and finally got to meet him. He is legendary in, the missionary department and missionary world. And President Dixon, you mentioned earlier getting to visit your mission. I feel like Oliver Cowdery, that those were days never to be forgotten. Sacred time to get to see you and Sister Dixon and the inspired, incredible leadership and your missionaries. It was truly a highlight of my life to get to visit you there. And John Gonzalez has been an amazing mentor and friend to me and invested so much in my learning and development, and is a dear, dear friend. And so I feel so honored to get to be with you. And I guess I would just share as my concluding thought that you don't have to learn a language alone. And people do that, and it's amazing, right? That people are professionals and are really good at learning a language, but that we're uniquely blessed in missionary work, that we get God's help to do it. And it's for a really important purpose of inviting God's children to come closer to Jesus Christ and receive all the blessings that are available there. And if missionaries and pre-missionaries, who might feel a little bit worried about that, can just remember that you won't have to do it alone. God will help you do it. It makes me think of Doctrine and Covenants, section 68, where the Lord is speaking to some new missionaries, and he says, "Behold, be of good cheer, and do not fear, for I, the Lord, am with you, and will stand by you. And ye shall bear record of me, even Jesus Christ, that I was, that I am to come." It's a stirring experience in a new language to be able to say, Jesus is the Christ. I know that. Yo sé que Jesús es el Cristo. And to get to bear witness of his name to those people and to fulfill prophecy that they get to receive the restored gospel in their own language. It's something that, for me, changed me deeply. And I'm so honored to get to share a little bit with your audience of what I've been able to observe of the Lord's hand revealed in missionaries, thousands and thousands of missionaries being able to learn a new language through God's help.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Preach My Gospel Mission Prep Podcast, and that it helps you in your study of Preach My Gospel and preparing you for your mission. Please join us for our next episode. And if you feel this podcast might be helpful to others preparing to serve a mission, please invite them to join us on our journey through and discovery of Preach My Gospel. For more information on how to get Institute credit for this podcast and other offerings by the Utah Valley Institute of Religion, please visit utahvalleyinstitute.com. You may also find us on Instagram at Preach My Gospel Podcast. Feel free to send questions or comments to preachmygospelpodcast@gmail.com. The Preach My Gospel Mission Prep Podcast is produced with the permission of the Utah Valley Institute of Religion. The hosts are expressing their personal views based on their own experiences, applying the principles of Preach My Gospel, and accept full responsibility for the content in these podcast episodes.